we heard that ABC wanted a medical show. So that's where Grey's Anatomy came from. The actual selling of the script so she could write it was not too difficult. Every step after that was hell.
Hi, I'm Sali Christensen, the founder and CEO of Argent, a women's workwear brand. And this is Work Friends, a podcast for those who take their work, but not always themselves, seriously.
Work Friends.
I, like everyone else in the world, am obsessed with Bridgerton, but I'm even more obsessed with Betsy Beers. If you haven't heard her name before, but have watched Bridgerton, Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, or How to Get Away with Murder, to name a few, then you're already familiar with Betsy's work. And I assure you, you're about to become a Betsy fan, too. As the executive producer of Shondaland and the creative partner to Shonda Rhimes for over 20 years, Betsy is responsible for bringing women's stories, specifically women of color, to the screen and truly shaping culture and inspiring careers. Her path to success was not linear, and it was not without roadblocks. I'm excited for her to share more of her story, how she's helped bring so much magic to life on screen, and a few memorable lessons along the way. With that said, here is my conversation with Betsy Beers. Betsy, hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good, Sally. How are you doing?
I'm excited.
You look good.
Thanks, likewise.
What are you wearing?
This is our most popular suit from last season. Thank you for asking. Our peak lapel blazer and pleated trouser and a navy linen. Yourself?
I'm loving that. I'm wearing your fabulous this season's 3-piece green linen suit.
So I want to center the conversation on work, and I'm just going to get right in. Work culture is rife with weird little professionalisms. What's your professional pet peeve and why?
It's people who don't listen.
Oh, yeah.
It's not judgy. It's not like they didn't hear you, or it's just people who don't listen to what's happening in a conversation, or people who, instead of listening, decide that they think they know better than whatever it is you're all talking about. For some reason, this makes me crazy because my background was like acting and I did improvisation and I grew up with a school teacher who was like, you need to really listen to things because that's the only way you understand what's going on. The fact that you will go into a situation and if somebody's more interested in some weird way in what they're saying than what the synthesis or totality of a conversation can even be. Because the fun of having a conversation like this is we listen to each other and we build on stories and it makes you think of something. And that's the joy of conversation. And in a workplace, it's super irritating because you have to do the same thing about 48 times, which is, I don't know, a waste of time. And I just, become an irritable crab cake.
Yeah, it obviously very much still happens in the environment that I'm in, but I feel like I see it less outside of a corporate environment. Because prior to this, I was working at Cisco, and I feel like I had to socialize things over and over and over again.
I get that.
I feel like I'd cut through a lot of the noise now.
I get that. I think for me, it's a creative environment. It's, we have a company, but it's not corporate. And look, bluntly, a lot of it comes from fear. Very often I think a sign of inexperience, and I found this a lot with writers and directors, is they don't want to take in input or constructive conversation because it's very important for them to appear as though they know everything. And I always say the biggest rookie mistake is to feel like looking like you know everything is going to solve problems. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was my first movie. I was standing on set and I was in the middle of New York and it was the middle of the night and all hell was breaking loose and it was relatively low budget. And I decided as a relatively novice producer that it was really important that everybody understood that I was really in charge. And I was really being in charge. And this really nice dude came up to me who I think was in the props department. And he said, he was probably, 20 years older than I was. And he'd been doing his job for a long time. And he said, can I just give you a piece of advice? And I said, what? He said, just admit it when you don't know something. Because you know what people love? They love to teach you things they know. And I was like, okay, first of all, where did this magic wizard come from? And it was sort of like a weird fairy tale where a dude just pops up and goes, hey, I'm gonna teach you a lesson. And I've never forgotten it. So I always go into situations figuring there's always something I haven't experienced and there's always something more to learn. and you can smell out a rookie in about 5 seconds if they're not willing to take constructive input.
It's funny hearing it from you too, because I do think your superpower is in how receptive you are to like receive. Now in your career, you have the most storied, successful, accomplished career. You're very accessible though, and approachable and direct, but open to feedback. So I feel like you do walk the walk in terms of.
I think you have to. And also, look, once again, like maybe it's because for a long time I was in a theatrical environment in which improvisation is all based on you can't do anything if you're not listening to what your partner's doing.
Yeah.
And I just feel like in general you have so much more fun because I always learn. So every time I talk to you, I learn something. We can give each other crap. It's really fun, but I always like walk away with this sort of thesis, antithesis, synthesis idea, which is, you throw in some sugar, I throw in some flour, and it's a damn loaf of bread when we're done, Sally.
Okay. So now we're going to dig into.
Oh, for God's sake.
Career.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Well, I want to start with your backstory, honestly. Like just as many conversations that we've had, and we've even featured you and done a write-up on you, your role is quite nebulous.
That's a beautiful way of describing it, by the way.
I mean, still to this day, it's like you just touch a little bit of everything. But I've heard you say, I didn't even know that this career existed. And so talk us through like young Betsy, what you were aspiring to and like what you envisioned for yourself.
From a very, very young age, I think I was probably 4, I decided I wanted to be an actor. And that was probably because my father was an agent. He was way older when I was born. He was an agent in the 40s, and he actually discovered Grace Kelly and a bunch of other people. And my mother actually, when I was very little, worked, and my father was the one that was home a lot, in a very strange kind of modern reversal because there was a lull in his career at that point. And so he taught me how to read by showing me these book called Theater Worlds, which were it's basically every play that's produced on Broadway from the 30s to the current days, which was the 60s. And I would learn how to point at actors and who they were. And we'd watch TV and I'd learn like, who's that? And I'd go, Burt Reynolds. So I think it was like, I was saturated with it anyway. Yeah. And I loved him and he was funny and he was really fun. And he was like having a really big kid at home. And I think it always seemed like it would be really fun. So I debuted in a performance of Noah's Ark on Long Island, where I grew up, when I was 5, and I played a butterfly. And that seemed just like a baller move, So I think then it got solidified. My father died very suddenly when I just turned 10. Mm. And I think somewhere in the back of my brain at that point, I could have all of a sudden shown this gigantic skill in being a surgeon, and I still would have gone, I think as part of my legacy, I should be an actor. So I limped along acting in school. I worked, in summer theater. I acted all the way through college. I did dinner theater, which, by the way, I don't recommend to anybody because it's really weird when you're running up and down a stage and people are like eating roast beef. It was terrible. And I went through that and I got to New York and I thought I was going to be this great actor, and I realized that wasn't going to happen. So I discovered the world of comedy, and I discovered the world of improvisation and sketch comedy, and I ended up joining a group where I learned a lot about how to do that. And then I met a couple of other people, and we went off and started a group on our own. And I juggled waiting on tables, acting in commercials occasionally, and doing these performances and writing songs when my other friend was writing the sketches. And we would put these shows on and have to get venues. And I found that I was always in the situation where I was like, okay, maybe this is the best way of doing it. Let's do it this way. Or how do we organize this and how do we organize that? And it was the first time I produced, and I didn't know I was producing, and I didn't know what producing was because I didn't know what the hell I was. And then I moved to Los Angeles to be an actor, and I couldn't get a job waitressing because all the restaurants in Los Angeles in late 80s didn't hire women as servers. you could only get a job like at a coffee shop. Any fine dining restaurant, they only hired men. I know, right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no. So I walked into this restaurant that we loved, that we ate at all the time, and I said, I'd like to be a server. And he said, I'm just going to ask you, what is it that you don't have that everybody on the floor has? And I looked around, it was all dudes. And I was like, oh, I don't have a penis. I understand the joke. So I got a job reading scripts, which was a job I didn't totally know existed, but I'd known from my father years anyway. And I've had a really good education, y'all. I loved my education. I'm really glad I had it. I studied film, I studied theater, I studied English literature. I had all the background, and I loved criticism and all that kind of work. So I started doing coverage, which simply means you read a script or a book and you do a synopsis, and then you tell people why you think it could be a movie or not be a movie. And I put this stuff, I just stuck this stuff in the mail because in those days there was no real system of getting a job. You just got some names of producers and just shoved it in the mail. And immediately I got these responses back. And I had a robust reading job like really quickly. And then about 2 weeks later, this one company called and said, do you want to come in? Because your ideas for the script are really good. Do you want to just come in and talk to the writer? And I was like, sure. Whatever. I'm an actor. And it sort of escalated. I ended up getting a job at a studio to read. And there was this sort of Waterloo moment where I got in the car with my comedy partner, then boyfriend, later husband, now ex-husband and friend.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know what to do because my dream is acting. And he was like, think about how you feel when you act and think about how you feel when you're doing this job. And I was like, well, this job is really easy. Like, I like it. It's exciting. I said, acting, though, it's my passion. He said, but you're miserable. So, dear reader, I said bye-bye to acting and started this way and then moved my way up the ranks through development and then kind of got to this place in the late 1990s, it's pretty much early 2000s, where the person whose company I was running, Mark Gordon, talked about getting into TV. And the secret was I'd always loved TV, but I'd been working in movies. So I was very excited about that. And we moved into the world of TV partially because the TV world had changed a lot and there was a lot of expectation to sort of compete with movies. And there was nobody who was really advocating for writers. I was always incredibly interested in the writers and making sure the writers were taken care of. And in television, in the olden days, there used to be these production companies, some of which were very famous, like Carsey Werner and Norman Lear. And a lot of what they did was they were either writers by trade or they had professional producers who created these companies, raised financing, and were there to support the creative of the show, the showrunner, the creator, the whole integrity of it. And then what they would do is they would license it to networks. By the time we got into television, which was part of the reason why it was interesting, was a lot of those people they didn't exist anymore. And a lot of studios, TV studios and movie studios had actually created these little mini studios that took over that job, which meant when you think about it, there was nobody independent from the entity that was putting the show on the air that would defend or stand up for the creative of the writer and the show. So we ended up moving into that because we saw a real need for this kind of advocacy, and because that's sort of what you did in movies. About a year later into it, I met Shonda.
And can you talk about that? Because I think that the relationship that y'all have between creative and business is rare. Did you know right away that y'all were in it for the long haul? Did you feel like there was some magic there? Can you sort of talk about that
Shonda
story? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I sort of knew right away. I mean, I knew I wanted to be working in television, and I knew one of my special powers was all the way through movies development. I could look at a story and go, I think this is a TV show. This is not a movie. There's a progress of growth in a movie that is much more like storytelling with a happy ending. And TV's much more to me like life and therapy, where you just kind of keep going. And so I was meeting writers, and a mutual friend had said, I think you two will get along. I'd never met her, and I really hadn't read her work. I knew who she was because she'd done a couple of things that I was aware of, and they sent me a couple of scripts, and I was like, I really like her writing. She's really interesting. And it was sort of like she walked in, and we pretty much immediately just sort of like hit the ground running. We're very different. We have different backgrounds, but we also have sort of similar interests and backgrounds. We sort of from word go discovered that we were interested in a lot of the same things. We were both really attracted to storytelling in a very similar fashion. She'd recently been just binging television shows, I think, and we had a lot to talk about. And I just liked her, loved her energy. And we were very different at that point, I think. I was much more sort of like this, loud, outgoing, ask a lot of questions. And she was very forthcoming and fun to be with, but I would say she wasn't as much of an extrovert, is the best way to put it. She was sort of more of a writer, introvert. And we hit it off and we worked on a show. The first year that I met her, the first year we got together, that was about work correspondence, female work correspondence. And it was terrific. And they seriously considered it for us to shoot as a pilot. But that was the year the war broke out after 9/11. Mm. And also, just for the record, it would have cost like $1 billion because we both came from movies. Mm-hmm. So we had like tanks rolling in and thousands of people and
jets.
And we laugh about it now and go like, that was really smart. But then the second year, like as seasons in TV, it's like, you start in the summer. In the olden days in network, you start in the summer, you would start to pitch, you'd sell a pitch, you had the fall to basically have the script written. They would make a decision in January, you would go off and then you would film a pilot, and then they let you know in May during this thing called Upfronts, which just for the record is going on right now in New York. And we heard that ABC wanted a medical show. So that's where Grey's Anatomy came from.
I feel like you make it sound more straightforward, though, than I imagined that it was. I mean, you're two women that are you're pushing culture in every way imaginable with that show. And I'm sure, it did evolve what you were able to do with it with success, but like getting it to green light, like how do you get that green lit? And do you feel like your gender held you back? Like, were there obstacles that arose as?
It's funny because I think what was interesting and refreshing, side note, about television was there were more women in at least medium positions. So optically, you look and you kind of go, oh, this could work. The actual selling of the script so she could write it was not difficult, was not too difficult. The dude in the room, he got it, which was nice. And he basically got, the soap part of it, I think. Every step after that was hell. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is we both, like we set out and we had these conversations about the fact that we never, there was nothing on TV at that point that felt like us, that looked like us, that sounded like us. And we both had she's a writer and I've been working, in an environment with competition but my work friends were my friends. And it didn't mean that we weren't competing sometimes. It didn't mean that we didn't agree and we were messy. And I was such a hot mess from age 32 to, I'm
now.
Still a hot mess. But I covered better because I wear like really good suits from Argent. I was just like, oh my God. And I think for us, the first big hurdle was, okay, the script comes in and our executives really like it and it moves up the food chain and everyone's nervous. And at this point, and we can fact check this, but I think that there are co-presidents of ABC at that point, and it was a gentleman and then a woman named Susan Line. And I remember we were on the bubble. Every other pilot had been picked up. And Shonda and I went in and we prepared this whole thing about why we were relevant. And I think she saw our passion. And I think Susan Line's a really, really smart woman, and she's still a really smart woman. I still want to thank you for everything she did. But she gave us a shot because she saw these two hot and bothered people who really had something to say in an environment in which that was not actually always the norm. So that was hell. But it was okay because she was nice and we did a whole like presentation with pictures and stuff. I remember everybody was very, very open to the casting that we insisted on, which is if you read the original script of Grey's Anatomy, nobody's described. Nobody's described with any kind of age describers, gender, race, sexual orientation. It's like, with the exception of that Meredith and Derek have sex in the beginning. But it was a very conscious thing that I think is to both of us. It was important that we could create a world and a hospital that really looked like a hospital. And we would laugh and go like, hey, did you ever go into a hospital and all there is white dudes? So they were great. And there was never an issue in terms of that. We were like the little engine that could. We were the last pilot to be picked up. We ended up with a wonderful director who we'd known, Linda Lowy, who turned into our casting director for 500 years. Didn't really do TV very much, but she fell in love with the script. We ended up, and she knew Sandra Oh. So it was sort of like, okay, we're just going to like build this little house. So we shot the pilot, and that's a whole other long story, and did the whole thing. And then we were the last show to be picked up for series. And the advertisers, I remember, gave us like 5 out of 10 or something. But it was funny. It was sort of like Susan Line, she just was sort of like, I think this gets a shot. It's a shot. It's a different voice. Now, remember that this is the season of Desperate Housewives and of Lost. So those shows were sparkly and fabulous, and they knew it from the beginning, and everybody was just like panting like animals because those shows were so great and blah, blah, blah. And so the funny thing was we went off to make, our half order of 12 episodes plus a pilot, and we kind of faded into the distance, and they didn't give us very much money. And so we kind of just went off in a corner and made the show after an initial couple of bumps in the road, very little interference. And they decided to put us on, I think it was like Easter Sunday in 2005, I think, and the 10 o'clock slot in the Boston legal slot, I think it was. And everybody was pretty confident, or a lot of people were confident that we wouldn't survive the night. And the joke was we woke up the next morning and all these people had watched the show. And I didn't know how to read ratings, but I pretended I knew how to read ratings. Remember what I said about the beginning of this podcast where I said, just listen and admit you don't know what you're doing? This is a perfect example of making my own mistake. So we get the ratings, and the only ratings I understand are like from the 90s, like because my friends did TV. So I think we did terribly. So I call Shonda and I go, I'm really sorry. These are terrible. She goes, it's so weird. My phone's ringing. Like, I don't know where my phone's ringing. I was like, I know it's so terrible. And it was everybody going like, you don't understand. Like, all these people watched your show. And it kept kind of building from there.
You said like 4 things I want to dig in on. So
good luck.
First of all, you're the last one standing. Grace just celebrated 20 years or 20 seasons, which is incredible. One thing you touched on, which I think is really important to talk about, is that women, even with the accomplishments that you have, we don't have our shit together. And I don't think we talk about that enough because I think there's so much pressure on women to be perfect in every facet of life. And one of the reasons I want to do this podcast is because that's false. Like, it's not true. It's messy and it's ugly. And, sometimes we're falling apart behind the scenes. I keep getting asked, like, how do you do it all? And how do you keep your balance? I'm like, I'm very much not balanced right now. But I think that talking about it is a really important thing. So people hear that and recognize that it is a very imperfect process. So I think to even dive into like this week, was there an oh no moment this week where, even with all the success that you've had, and you've got Bridgerton premiering this week, was there anything that went sideways for you?
Yeah, there are always things that can go sideways. And I'm not going to get into some of the things that went sideways this week because it's too soon. But I think there are always things that are going sideways. And when there are things that I can actually talk about openly that aren't,
yes,
things for business that are, are just things that I'm dealing with, I think it's always really important to make it incredibly clear that we are all messy.
Yes.
And I think it's one of the things about Grace, which was really important, is that we're all messy. And that this whole kind of idea of it's fighting this concept. And it's part of the reason surgeons were so interesting, because you can walk in and go like, I trust doctors straight out, that now I'm going to give you a bunch of people you don't trust yet. Now I'm going to give you but their hearts are in the right place. You know that. And therefore, because their hearts are in the right place, you're going to absorb their foibles and their blind spots and, everything else. I agree with you. I think one of the things it goes back to our original conversation about listening. The problem is when you are expected to be perfect, you can't ask questions. You can't be curious. You can't admit your flaws because they're going to be used against you. mean, all those things, which for women for generations, I mean, I'll tell you a story. When I lost my job reading, let's go back to the beginning of the fucking podcast. I lost my job reading, the studio closed down, I was looking for a job. I walked into this producer's office. I'd been recommended for the job. There was a dude working there who I still know now, who clearly I walked in, he was sort of like, you understand you'd be working for me, right? There was a much more powerful, relatively well-known producer in the other room. I said, uh-huh. And he said, yeah, because I don't want you thinking that you could be working for him. And I was like, okay, look, I'm just taking all this in. And I went into the other dude's office, and this is late 80s, y'all. Mm. And he sits me down, and there are all these posters on the wall, these movies that I really love. And it's like, that's great. And I love a old crusty fella. There's nothing like, they're funny. And he's like, and we're talking about movies. And he said, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah. He said, so are you married, single? I said, oh, I've been, I'm like been with the same guy. And I don't remember if we were going to get married. And he said, so how do I know you're not going to get pregnant? And I paused and I said, oh, I see. So being pregnant would be a problem. He said, well, yeah, I mean. And I said, well, what if we arranged this so that I put an EPT test on your desk every month so you could see I wasn't pregnant? Would that make you happy? And he laughed really hard. Mm-hmm. And it came out of my mouth. I mean, that was so incredibly outspoken, but I was like, sure, you want to look at my urine? Because you can, if you like. And he laughed and he got it. And they offered me the job and I turned it down. And it's going back to that thing of, on one hand, I kind of respected the fact he just asked. But on the other hand, can you imagine? Yeah, I can imagine. And there's a version of this in this improved society where this still exists.
Yes.
And constantly. And the idea that the vulnerability aspect, I mean, I think it's obviously, I hope, improved over the years, but we're always vulnerable to a higher standard. And I just have always been, I think, I try to present myself as I really am, which is I'm smart and I'm articulate and I'm really good at my job and I'm really passionate about what I do. At the same point, I'm also a hot mess and I have no problem. The great thing about getting older is you can't stop age no matter what they inject in you, I guess. I probably should try getting something, but you can't stop it. And the less there is to lose in a way. So I look at my younger colleagues and I make a fool of myself every day because sometimes it's really important for people around you to see that you can be messy and still be successful. You can be outspoken. You can lose your temper occasionally. You can wear the wrong shoe, and do you find the same thing? I mean, and especially, you're like basically running a business where it's for women, by women. Where do you come up against this on a regular basis?
I think that we give up too much power too quickly to our employers, I think is probably my experience of this, where I see women that we interact with talk about fear in a lot of different ways of getting pregnant, of not going on the trip postpartum, of there's a long list of things, of losing their job, et cetera, et cetera. And my perspective and approach has always been, you're lucky to have me and I'm going to be outspoken and you have this. I am unapologetic in my approach, period.
Yeah.
And I think that takes a certain level of confidence, but it's a better existence. And if it's the right fit, then the outcome is great. And if it's coming from a place of fear and giving up that power, the work output suffers. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that there are a billion jobs in the world and not everywhere is the right fit for you. And we have to really take control of our experience while we're here because it's a short life.
I think you're absolutely right. And it's like going back to that job that I turned down. I couldn't afford to turn that job down.
Totally. Like and I've turned checks down.
I was like, I was like freelance reading and I was like, but I wasn't going to go work there. I always used to say, you have two ways you can go. You got fear, you got passion.
Yes.
And I'm fearful of a lot of stuff. I'm fearful of hurting somebody. I'm fearful of not being thoughtful. I'm fearful, and this sounds like I'm some weird saint, but it's a neurosis. It's not like a happy thing. It's like I'm hyper vigilant in a lot of ways, but I can't help myself from saying what I think, and I can't help myself from simply trying to do the thing that gives me joy when I see it. And people always go like, how do you know what to make? I said, I don't know what to make. I'm going to have to live with the fucking thing. So if I don't love it, why would I do it? And it's like you and what you're doing is you actively, clearly love watching women come in to your store or to your pop-up or with conversation and have, what clothes are. It's semiotics. I mean, clothes are symbols of how we feel about ourselves, right? And if we have something which gives us permission to look like we know what we're doing and we don't have to think about putting it on, it's the big advantage of suits, man. And I eschewed them for years. And now I'm like, oh my God, I hate getting dressed. This is amazing.
Yeah, I think that it's a lot simpler than we make it. Not the suiting part, but just the permission part. I think that we can make our lives so much easier. And it just doesn't have to be as complicated. And through you yourself as an individual and how you've approached work, I think that is necessary for women to continue seeing, which is why I wanted to start this brand. I think representation very much matters. And I think that you've had such a greater impact through the work that you've done, starting with Grey's Anatomy and now stringing it all the way through to Bridgerton. But like representation very much matters. People seeing themselves on screen very much matters. I cannot imagine how many lives you've touched through the work that you've done and how many careers you've shaped just by putting it on the screen. But also for me as an individual, I look to you as a model of how I think having a healthy relationship with work, because it's all driven by passion. And that's where we should be. I think that for me, work and life are very much blended. And I
totally agree. I mean, I think that's why the genius of Work Friends, your whole kind of Work Friends, the Argent slogan. No, but I think it's really, really smart because how do I put it? It's sort of like a lot of people don't have this luxury. In my business, I do probably. But if you can't be friends with the people that you work with, if you can't, you're not at the right place. And that's a very easy thing for me to say because there are a lot of people who can't afford not to be at the right place.
Yeah.
And I understand if you're in a job that you need to be in order to have an income, make no judgment on it. I think the aspiration is that you find a place where you can at least flourish or try to flourish partially by the other people that have been chosen to be there, because it tells you a huge amount about the way the company, the corporation, the tiny business, the creative group has been structured. And they always say that, the fish or the flower stinks or smells from the head up or down, or flowers and
fish rots from the head.
The fish rots from the head.
What's the other part?
I was trying to figure out a nice way of putting that, which is like the flower smells good, but because it's at the top, but I just made that up. And this is why probably I don't write because
that's definitely making it
That's
in.
A big old poopers. Yeah. I think it's really important to try to find your people.
Completely agree. I mean, work is, I think for both of us, just a big part of our lives.
I'd say so. I'd say for both of that's pretty accurate. And by the way, I wish I were better at guardrails and I wish I were better at unplugging, and every single thing that I think people think is a pro is not a pro. And I say this, I don't recommend, but I don't have a solution for people on how to be more balanced. And I actually admire a generation of people who are coming up in the world who are passionate, work incredibly hard, but have some sort of context that they might be able to form something, a different way of doing it.
It's a yes and no for me. There's a lot to unpack there.
Oh, there's a ton to unpack there.
Yeah, you touched on my work pet peeve, which is people telling me what I should be doing. So you should really take a nap. You should really take a vacation. You should really do all these things that are unrealistic in your current state.
Yes.
That's okay. I am aware.
And also, by the way, I can't nap.
Yeah,
Like, I don't nap.
I don't nap either.
I sleep at night. I'm like, don't tell me to nap on the damn plane.
It's wasted conversation to me where I'm like, thank you. I don't need to be having
Okay, also, the other thing that really bothers me is, oh, you must be so tired.
Oh, that too.
Aren't you so tired? I mean,
how do you do
how
it
do
all?
you do that?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, actually, I have no children. I have a dog who I worry about too much. I have a wonderful husband who I don't know last time I checked, has car keys, 2 legs, and is a genius on his own mind. What do you mean?
It's
like,
just, it's
not like,
question.
You know who's working really hard? That poor woman in the Amazon truck. That woman's tired.
Totally. The woman that had to go work 2 weeks after having a baby, that woman's fucking tired.
That woman's fucking tired.
Yes.
Yeah, come on.
We got to talk about Bridgerton?
Keep going.
Okay, so the world premiere, you were very gracious to include me.
Oh my God, she was so great, and she was wearing such a hot dress. It wasn't Argent, but they're going to be doing an evening line soon. So that's what I'm really looking forward to see. But she looked really good.
It was, to me,
both you and Alex look really good.
It was wild. It is the coolest part about my job is that we get a front row seat to cool women doing cool shit. And you were like the poster child of that. You embody that. But to be at the premiere, and I mean, this show, I remember in 2020 watching it when everyone in the world, I think, was watching it. Like, what is that like? What are you going through in that moment? And do you go into it knowing that that's the case because you've had so much success? What's that?
It's
experience?
So weird. It's like an out-of-body experience. And first of all, what I have to say is like, you know that moment when Bridgerton hit during COVID, you know?
I do know.
Okay. I didn't, because it was the holidays, the winter holidays, and we were all separated and nobody'd seen each other. And we'd been working in a dark room on this thing for months, and we'd never had a show launch worldwide ever in our little lives. We never had a show launch everywhere in the world at the same time. And no idea. I mean, this is what I will say. I love the show. I really hope people would love the show. I felt like the show would hit by the time it was all put together. And I remember having a conversation specifically with Reggae before we launched, and I was like, dude, I think buckle your seatbelt. I think this is going to be, I think this is going to be good. But I cannot emphasize enough the fact that, like, people always said, and this was going to be a hit, and you never know. All I know is if I like it. And if I like it, I have to be happy. And I said that with Grey's Anatomy was before it launched, Shonda, in the middle of the night, we were editing again for the 500th time. And she said, what do you think is going to happen? I said, I don't know, but I like it. And so if it doesn't do well, I'm going to load up VCR tapes or VHR tapes or whatever the hell they were called, put them in the back of my car, and I'll drop them off at friends' houses. Because I like it, and we like it, and we love it. And that's been the motto is if it's something that we are really proud of and we love, and it's a story that certainly that I feel passionate about, that's a lot of it. And it's then in terms of execution of production, my job is to advocate for a show. My job is to be the person in the room who constantly is trying to figure out how we absolutely support and enhance the vision of the creator, and that I am there to do whatever is absolutely necessary to make that happen. And I'm there to strategize to figure out how to make that happen. And I'm there from the concept all the way through production to release. And I'm really lucky because I get to do a lot of different things, but they all have one thing in common, which is it's making sure that the best possible product that we feel like is the best storytelling, and the storytelling which is truest to what we want to be and say, is out in the world.
To dig in more into your particular role, most glamorous, I feel like I saw it. What are the most glamorous parts of that job in bringing these stories to life into the world? And least glamorous, because that's the more fun part of the question.
The most glamorous is probably, as you said, is look, we have been I've been very fortunate for years that people throw gigantically large premieres, and that there are these amazing parties, and that this job has given me access to your brand. This job and my profile has given me access to you and the people you've introduced me to, that over the years, I've met incredibly, insanely, phenomenal, powerful, inspiring women and people that I never, ever would have had the opportunity to meet if I had not had this job. I'd never take for granted the incredible ticket I have into a world I never would have been able to access. That's more than more than the parties and the cool dresses. And I mean, all that stuff is really fun. It's stressful sometimes, but it's fun. But it's the conversations and the relationships I've been able to build with people like you, because that is a gift, because I think we all meet and we hold each other up and we lift each other up, and then everybody brings somebody new to the party.
I feel like you are revered among colleagues and outside. Like, I feel like everyone respects and looks up to you so much. How do you look at the next generation? And for me, like personally, I feel like you've been so generous with your time and just your wisdom. But like, how do you?
I get suits. Like I buy great suits now, guys. This is great.
But I think what I've observed is that the best leaders are really intentional with their time and how they give back to the next generation. I feel like you are such a great example of that. And I also think, and I saw it, come to life this week, I feel like you've created opportunities for people within Shondaland, and people, that you've worked with. Like, you have been able to scale your impact by bringing in and mentoring and sponsoring people.
Thanks.
So I think the question is like, I don't know what the question is. It's
if the question is like, do you feel like it's important? Of course it's important. And one of the things that I say a lot is, look, you'd be an idiot not to. Like, you would be an idiot not to look around you, find the best and smartest, and sometimes the people who don't know what they want to do and the most eager, but people who are passionate and who want to work hard and are looking for their special thing. I mean, I didn't wake up when I was 4 and say, I really want to be a TV producer and have this job, because I didn't know the job existed and I was 4. But so a lot of, I think one of the great things is, and this is why I love speaking about it so much, and I super appreciate the fact that you and the company have given me a platform on which I can actually scream to the heavens that this is a phenomenal job that you can do part of it, you can do some of it. There are all these different versions of it. You can do physical, you can do the creative part. You don't have to do all of it. But that this exists, and exists as a reality for people who maybe don't want to be writers, who don't want to be directors, who like me suck as actors or have discovered they didn't want to be an actor, that there's this whole other world in which you have this incredible amount of creative experience and you get to collaborate. And part of the joy I get is finding people around who are really looking or are really trying to figure out who they want to be. And I want to help them shortcut. I don't want to have them have to go through 55 careers to get to this. And look, mine were all, every single thing you do is important. And the other piece of advice I give to everybody is you never make a mistake in what you choose, because it will always come back and you will always use it. But I mean, I love meeting people who are curious and want any advice they could get. And I learn from them every single time I talk to them. Like, every single person I meet, especially people, who are in their 20s and 30s and 40, and in other words, younger than me. I learn a ton. I learn, I'm constantly looking at people and saying, like, I have no idea how to do this ticker talker. Just what is the best way to do this? Or is there a way I could be doing this better? And on top of it, I think it's just it's great to be able to expose somebody to all of these different areas and watch them see something that speaks to them personally. And if we can't do it, if we can't figure out ways of raising up and hiring and advocating for women and people of color and diversity of gender, if you don't have those points of view around, you won't make the best content. And you want to make the best content. And if you're all you care about is money, you will make more because more people will want to watch your shows because they will be able to feel what you're feeling. And it's so obvious, but it's sometimes so hard to find.
Yep.
And it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I think the question is, your time is finite. So what qualities are you looking for in someone that you're spending time with to sponsor, to bring up, what do you want to see in the next generation coming to the workforce?
I think it's passion, dedication.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very hard for the next generation coming up because a lot of what they've seen is the burnout and how I think there's a very kind of love-hate relationship with the concept of work taking over your life, which I understand. I hope that some of that gets integrated into the workplace. But I always look for passion and the ability to listen, and which we've talked about, and some human wealth of experience that they can bring to the job and that they're happy to share, and hunger. I think I also look for generosity and kindness and respect. And those are the other things that I think are crucial to not only surviving in this business, but surviving as a human being.
Yes.
So we have a famous no assholes policy, which sometimes we try never to fall short, but you try to make sure that the people that are coming in that are looking for advice or to move up in the world remember that being kind and respectful and deliberate is incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think the reverse mentorship piece is invaluable. And
oh my
I think
gosh.
That's the secret too, right? It's like you're constantly innovating with the content that you're putting out, and it's necessary that you're touching in with every generation and have a pulse on what's happening. So I do think it's mutually beneficial, and I think that's what's important for folks to hear, because I think sometimes 20-something-year-olds who are so hungry and like desperate for this content and access are reluctant to just ask, especially women. So I think that it's important for them to hear that there are people like us that want to carve out a really significant portion of time to be with them and to bring them up and to learn from them and to give back to them. And I think it's about asking and approaching and being bold, and requesting sponsorship or time or mentorship or whatever it is.
Without a doubt. And look, I think the main thing for people like me to remember is there's always something to learn from the other person.
Yes.
There's absolutely always something, because I can tell you about every Hitchcock movie, but somebody in my office is the person who's saying, you really, really need to watch this on, YouTube, or you actually would really like this thing, which is something you never, ever would have thought about looking at, or this movie, or just a piece of advice from their life.
Well, I've told you this a million times, and now I'm going to record it because you can see that I don't say it to everyone. You're like one of my favorite people on the planet. I'm very grateful to you for a number of reasons. Thank you for being here and letting us hold you late. And
oh my God,
for not giving me shit for being late.
so much fun. And also, I feel the same way about Sali, y'all. She's a really, really good friend and a gigantic advocate. And please check out the Suits.
Thank you. And Bridgerton
season 3. Check out you won't be disappointed, I promise.
Any teasers you want to leave us with?
Just no.
You just know that it'll be good. That's the beauty.
You got to do it.
Yeah. Thanks, Betsy. Thanks for listening to Work Friends, a podcast from Argent. Listen and follow on all podcast platforms and subscribe to the Argent YouTube channel for more clips and bonus content. Plus, email your work questions and dilemmas at workfriends@argentwork.com for a chance to have one of our amazing guests weigh in with advice. I'm Sali Christensen, and we'll see you next time.
Work Friends.
Work Friends is produced by Gina Marinelli and Chris Allen with editing by Justin Kropf. Our theme music is by Melanie Naima and Karina De Piano.